In every age, humanity has been driven by one question: who holds power and how is it used? Empires have risen and vanished, not merely through strength, but through the wisdom or blindness of those who govern them. Power by itself is a raw force, but statecraft is its artful direction. It is the discipline that transforms ambition into structure, chaos into order, and opportunity into strategy. When we speak of statecraft, we enter the mind of the state, the invisible architecture behind its decisions. Every policy, every alliance, every conflict carries the fingerprint of calculation. And behind that calculation lies the eternal struggle between the ideal and the possible. Statecraft is not politics, it is what shapes politics. It is not diplomacy, it is what commands diplomacy. It is not economics, it is what bends economics towards purpose. To understand statecraft, one must look at nations not as flags or governments, but as living organisms competing for space, security, and influence. Each uses all that it possesses: energy, culture, wealth, intelligence to shape the world in its own image. In this series, we will explore how states think, plan, and maneuver, how invisible decisions in closed rooms ripple across the world, and how the survival of nations depend not on chance but on the craft of their statesmen. Statescraft begin where morality meets necessity and where survival transforms into strategy. To understand the idea of statecraft, we must first travel to its beginnings, to the earliest moments when humans learned not merely to rule but to govern with purpose. In the river valleys of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Indus, kings were not just warriors, they were architects of order. They built palaces, laws, and bureaucracies, turning loose tribes into early states. The idea of statecraft was born here, in the notion that stability could be engineered and authority could be institutionalized. As centuries unfolded, power evolved into sophistication. The Chinese concept of Li and Fa, the moral and the legal, taught rulers how to maintain order through virtue and law. In India, Kautilya's Arthashastra laid out an intricate philosophy of governance, a science of power that fused moral ambition with ruthless realism. In Greece, the art of persuasion and diplomacy emerged in the city states of Athens and Sparta, while in Rome, statecraft reached imperial scale, machinery of law, surveillance, and conquest that bound continents. Each civilization contributed a unique thread. Chinese dynasties gave statecraft its bureaucratic soul. Indian philosophy gave its intellect and pragmatism. Greek thinkers gave its reason. Rome gave it its discipline. And through the Middle Ages, religion became the moral language of power. Popes crowned emperors, empires rose on faith and fell to fanaticism. Yet beneath it all, the calculus of control, taxation, alliance, espionage remained unchanged. When the Enlightenment dawned, the idea of the state transformed once again. Power was no longer divine, it was contractual. The ruler's legitimacy would now depend not on God's favor, but on the consent of the governed. Still, even democracy demanded its own form of statecraft, perhaps more subtle but no less strategic. Then came the 19th century, the age of empires and revolutions. Bismarck in Prussia, Metternich in Austria, and the diplomatic webs of Europe revealed statecraft as something more than administration. It became the practice of survival amid rivals, the balancing of interests, and the orchestration of alliances. In the 20th century, as ideologies collided and global wars consumed the world, statecraft evolved into the management of total society. An era where economics, propaganda, and science became instruments of national power. Today, in the digital age, statecraft continues to evolve. Cyber networks replace espionage rings, trade sanctions replace blockades, narrative replace armies, yet the essence remain unchanged. The art of using every tool, seen and unseen, to advance the life of the state. Statecraft in every era reflects the intelligence of its civilization. It is how power learns to think, how authority learns to endure, and how nations, through centuries of trial and error, have learned that survival itself is a form of strategy. From mud brick cities to metropolises of steel, one truth endures that nations who master statecraft write history, and those who neglect it becomes its not. If the art of statecraft is to master power, then we must ask, what is power? How does a state become strong? And what, beneath the surface of flags and armies, enables a nation to shape the world around it? The anatomy of power is like an iceberg. Above the surface, the obvious soldiers, weapons, leaders, but below, vast foundations remain hidden in plain sight. First, geography, mountains and rivers, coasts and heartlands, the unchanging theater upon which politics unfold. The Himalayas have shielded Indian civilization for millennia. The English Channel guarded Britain from countless invasions. Control over land, sea, air, and now cyberspace forms the first skeleton of state strength. Second, population. Numbers matter, but not merely for soldiers or workers. A large, skilled, and cohesive population powers economies, innovates, and projects culture. But demographics also shape vulnerability. Societies divided by language, faith, or inequality may struggle to convert numbers into unity. Third, economy. Wealth buys resilience and freedom of action. A nation rich in resources, industry, and technology can not only sustain its people but export influence through trade, investments, and the manipulation of global markets. But rapid wealth without stability can make a state brittle, prone to sudden collapse or foreign domination. Fourth, institutions, laws, bureaucracy, education, and the machinery of governance. These are less visible, yet more enduring than any army. Strong institutions channel ambition, resolve disputes, and guarantee power outlives any single ruler. They are the spine of the state, allowing it to adapt, learn, and survive shocks. Fifth, military capability. Ultimately, the threat or use of force settles disputes when words fail. But military strength is more than hardware. It is doctrine, training, adaptability, and the will to fight. History remembers not the largest armies, but the best led, the most disciplined, and the most prepared. Sixth, Strategy and leadership. Ideas outweigh numbers. Nations with visionary leaders and coherent grand strategies punch above their weight. From Bismarck's Germany to Lee Kuan Yew's Singapore, history shows that clarity of purpose can compensate for material limits. Seventh, soft power, culture, values, and narrative. The invisible levers that captivate hearts and minds beyond borders. Hollywood, K pop, yoga, democracy. These shape global opinion and win allies where armies cannot march. Eighth, information and intelligence. In the world of statecraft, to know is to control. The gathering, analysis, and manipulation of information, whether through diplomats, spies, or algorithms, is now as critical as military or economic strength. Ninth, resilience and adaptability. A state's true power is tested in crisis. Can it withstand shocks? Does it learn from defeat and recover stronger? The nations that survive are not the most powerful in peace, but the most flexible in chaos. All these elements, like bones and sinews, come together to animate the body of the state. No nation possesses them all in equal measure, nor holds them unchanged forever. The balance shifts with fortune, decision, and time, but the mastery of statecraft lies in recognizing these elements and weaving them like threads into a fabric of enduring power. A state's future is not written in destiny, but in its choices, how it combines geography with insight, population with unity, wealth with wisdom, and power with restraint. To understand power, then, is to see not only the sword, but the hand that wields it, and the mind that commands the hand. That is the true anatomy of the state. Every state, no matter how vast or complex, behaves as if it possesses a mind, a consciousness that weighs, chooses, and acts in pursuit of goals. But this mind is not merely a single brain, it is a composite made of institutions, advisors, leaders, ideologies, and the unseen instincts of a civilization. The mind of the state is where statecraft comes alive. It is here that emotion wrestles with logic, ambition with caution, morality with necessity. Every decision to make peace, to go to war, to open markets, or to close borders passes through the corridor of this invisible intellect. At its core lies one principle: the survival of the state precedes everything else. History rarely remembers nations that were righteous but reckless. It remembers those that endured, those that managed risk, adapted to uncertainty, and combined wisdom with strength. This instinct for survival gives birth to strategy. Strategy is not simply planning, it is the ability to connect means to ends, to balance short term interest with long term vision. It is knowing what not to do as much as what to do. And above all, it is the discipline to think several moves ahead, like a grandmaster in a game where the stakes are existence itself. But the strategic mind is often divided. Within every government, there exists tension. The military seeks security, the economist seeks prosperity, the diplomat seeks peace, and the politician seeks approval. Statecraft is the art of uniting these instincts under one coherent purpose, preventing chaos from becoming policy. Throughout history, statesmen who mastered this imbalance have shaped eras, from Pericles guiding Athens through conflicting passions, to Kautilya, who advised rulers to blend virtue with cunning, or Churchill, who saw further into crisis than his peers. Their genius lay in harmonizing the moral and the pragmatic. The state's mind, however, is not immune to illusion. Power breeds confidence, and confidence, if left unchecked, breeds catastrophe. Empires fall not because they lack strength, but because they misjudge limits. They believe ambition to be destiny. True statecraft demands knowing one's boundaries as precisely as one's potential. And yet, every calculation rests on uncertainty. No leader, no intelligence system, no ideology can predict the full turbulence of history. This is why the strategist's greatest weapon is adaptability, the courage to change course when the winds shift. And crises come, and they always do. The state's mind is tested. It must think clearly while under pressure, choose between undesirable options, and preserve legitimacy amid fear. This is the crucible where nations either evolve or collapse. The calmest voice in chaos often decides the fate of millions. Every decision leaves a trace, every hesitation a shadow, and with each generation, a nation's experience becomes part of its statecraft. In memory, doctrine, or reflex. Over time, these memories create something greater, a collective intelligence, what we call national character. It is the invisible logic behind why certain nations act predictably while others move like storms. This logic, born of victories and traumas, shape how a state sees itself and what it believes is worth defending. Thus, the mind of the state is not about one ruler or one government, it is about continuity, the way power remembers institutions, doctrines, and the strategic culture of a nation form a wisdom that outlives generations. Leaders come and go, but the state endures only if its state mind remains alert. In the end, statecraft is not just a science of power, it is the psychology of power. It is how the state perceives threats, interprets its environment, and projects intention. The more clearly it can see itself and its world, the longer it survives. For in statescraft, as in life, the greatest danger is not weakness, it is blindness. If the state's mind is where decisions are born, then the instruments of statecraft are the hands that execute them. These are the tools through which ideas become influence and the strategy becomes reality. The first and oldest of these is diplomacy, the art of persuasion without war. From the palace courtyards of ancient kingdoms to the modern corridors of embassies, diplomacy has always been the front line of state interaction. It is built on conversation, yet behind every word lies power. Ambassadors carry messages, but also warnings. They negotiate, delay, deceive, and sometimes rescue the world from conflict by simply extending time. True diplomacy is not about agreement, but about leverage. It transforms uncertainty into advantage. By understanding what the other side fears, values, or needs most. In diplomacy, silence often speaks louder than speech. A handshake or its absence can alter destiny. And in every era, the most skilled diplomats have known that the purpose of negotiation is not peace at any cost, but peace that serves purpose. If diplomacy is the voice of statecraft, intelligence is its ears and eyes. No state can act wisely without knowledge. From ancient spies in enemy courts to modern satellites orbiting in silence, intelligence defines the limits of a nation's foresight. Information is never neutral. It can guide, mislead, or manipulate. Intelligence agencies do more than gather secrets, they shape perception. They seed narratives, foster divisions, and sometimes wage wars of information where no bullet is fired. But intelligence also carries moral weight. The line between protection and intrusion, between security and control, is perilously thin. A state that relies on secrecy too much may forget how to trust even itself. But when that happens, the mind of the state begins to turn against its own body. Then comes economic power, the invisible war that defines our century. Where once nation fought with armies, today they battle through markets, trade, and finance. A sanction can now cripple a rival faster than an invasion. A trade alliance can create dependence, then lasts longer colonization. Money has become a new weapon, subtle, surgical, and global. Through aid and debt, nations bind others to their orbit. Through technology, they project not just products, but values and influence. Economic statecraft no longer merely supports policy, it is policy. The modern strategist fights wars in credit ratings, energy supplies, and currency systems. Every era has its signature weapon. For Rome, it was the legion. For Britain, the fleet. For America, the dollar. And for the 21st century, it is data. Information itself has become the bloodstream of power, and controlling its flow is the new high of statecraft. Yet these instruments, powerful as they are, depend entirely on the wisdom that wields them. A diplomat can provoke war as easily as prevent it. An intelligence service can protect liberty or destroy it. Economy can enrich or enslave. Statecraft demands not only mastery of tools, but mastery of restraint. The instruments of statecraft are neutral, like fire or steel. It is the character of the state that decides whether they forge civilization or feed destruction. For in the end, it is not technology or wealth that define a nation's power, but how consciously it chooses to use them. Diplomacy, intelligence, economics, these are merely extension of the same eternal will, the desire of the state to survive, advance, and endure beyond its time. For much of modern history, the world believed it was marching towards unity, a shared system of rules, markets, and progress that would dissolve all rivalries. But reality has proven otherwise. The 21st century is not the end of power politics, it is their rebirth, refined, refined, digitized, and far more complex. We now live in a multipolar world, a landscape where power is no longer held by one empire nor by two superpowers, but scattered among many ambitious states: the US, China, India, Russia, Europe, and numerous regional actors each command influence in different domains: military, economic, technological, cultural. No single power can dominate all. No alliance can remain permanent. Every player must maneuver, balance, and anticipate a return to classical statecraft, but on a global scale. In this world, rivalry has evolved. It is no longer the open war of trenches and flags. It is quiet competition through supply chains, semiconductors, and algorithms. Territory still matters, but so do data cables, trade routes, and rare earth minerals. Influence now travels at the speed of connection. The line between peace and war have blurred. Economic sanctions can wound as deeply as a siege. Cyber attacks can cripple infrastructure with invisible force. Social media can fracture unity faster than invasion. Power, once measured in armies and fleets, is now computed in terabytes, market shares, and narrative control. But beneath these new tools lies the same ancient struggle: who commands the rules of the world? Who sets the standards by which technology, trade, and morality are judged? And who has the moral authority to lead? In a multipolar system, answers shift constantly. Alliances form not from ideology but from interest. Friendships fade as soon as incentives change. Statecraft thus becomes a permanent exercise in balance, a tightrope walk where missteps can bring isolation or collapse. Yet, amid this turbulence, smaller nations too have discovered new power. Technology, geography, and diplomacy now allow even modest states to shape the equilibrium. Singapore, Turkey, and the Gulf states show that agility can rival size, that cleverness can substitute for dominance. The age of blocks is giving way to the age of networks, and the great contest of our era is no longer simply East versus West or North versus South. It is control over the architecture of the future itself, over pipelines, ports, digital platforms, and minds. When power is dispersed, so is chaos. Without restraint, multipolarity can degenerate into fragmentation, a world without equilibrium where every gain breeds resentment and every loss invites revenge. The true challenge of modern statecraft is not in winning a competition, but in preventing competition from becoming catastrophe. History's lessons become a whisper. Each time power has multiplied without wisdom, before the world wars, before colonial revolts, before financial collapses, vanity has paid dearly. Today's leaders must remember: multipolarity is not stability by itself, it is merely a condition. That one demands careful, continuous management, the discipline to balance ambition with humility, the foresight to anticipate consequence, and the courage to choose restraint when aggression feels righteous. Statecraft in our time is not about conquest, but about coexistence under pressure. It demands the intellect of history, the patience of diplomacy, and the precision of strategy, all woven together in a world that listens less and acts faster. As global order grows tangled, the new masters of statecraft will not be those who shout loudest, but those who can think quietly, who can interpret chaos, shape coalition from confusion, and safeguard their national interest without destroying the system that sustains it. For in every era, statecraft has been the art of preventing the world from devouring itself, and the purpose remains unchanged. Every great strategist has faced a moment of reckoning, a point where power collides with principle. It is here that the moral dimension of statecraft begins. For centuries, thinkers have debated one question: can a state be moral, or is morality a luxury reserved for individuals while nations must act only to survive? The realists of history, Machiavelli, Hobbes, taught that the state is bound by necessity, not virtue. That when the survival of the nation is at stake, morality must yield. Yet idealists argue the opposite, that power without purpose becomes corruption, and the legitimacy of states depend not only on their strength but on the justice of their actions. Both are right and both are wrong, for the truth lies not in choosing between morality and power, but in mastering their balance. The state must act in a world that is not moral, a world driven by ambition, fear, and deception. Yet, if every state abandons principle entirely, chaos follows. Morality, therefore, is not weakness, it is the architecture of order, the invisible contract that makes trust, alliance, and civilization itself possible. The moral challenge of statecraft lies in its paradox. A decision that secures peace for millions may require injustice to a few. A compromise that seems cynical may in time prevent bloodshed, and sometimes silence is more ethical than truth. When truth would ignite the fires of war, these choices weigh heaviest on those who understand consequence. To rule wisely is to live with impossible equations between conscience and necessity, justice and survival, mercy and power. In every age, the wisest statesmen have sought a form of morality fitted to a reality, a restraint shaped by circumstance, not oblivious to it. Kautilya called it the dharma of the ruler, duty without illusion. Confucius called it harmony, order through ethical conduct, and modern thinkers see it as responsible power, the virtue of strength guided by foresight. When power forgets restraint, it breeds tyranny. When morality forgets strength, it breeds naivety. When the two are joined, it births legitimacy, the rarest asset in international life, more enduring than any weapon or wealth. Every generation must redefine where its moral lines are drawn. The use of drones, the control of data, the manipulation of information, these are no longer technical issues, but ethical ones. The weapons of modernity have outpaced our philosophies, and so statecraft now demands not only intellect but conscience. There are limits to what the state can do and remain worthy of its own survival. To oppose one's people is to weaken the nation from within. To destroy the environment for profit is to impoverish the next generation. To lie endlessly in the name of security is to loot the trust that makes power sustainable. The ultimate test of statecraft is not victory, but the wisdom to endure victory without arrogance and defeat without despair. Morality in statecraft is not a sermon, it is self preservation through integrity, because the power that loses its soul inevitably loses its purpose. Thus, the moral dimension of statecraft is not about good versus evil, it is about awareness, awareness of consequence, of proportion, of limits. True statecraft is not cruelty disguised as necessity. nor naivety mistaken for virtue. It is the constant struggle to act decisively while remembering what must never be lost. When power learns empathy and morality learns realism, civilization advances one step further from chaos. And perhaps that above all is the real purpose of statecraft, to wield power wisely in a world that rarely allows wisdom to survive. Statecraft has always adapted to the tools of its time, but now those tools are changing faster than the minds that command them. We stand at the threshold of a new era, an age where technology is no longer an instrument of policy, but the environment within which policy must survive. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, genetic engineering, and autonomous warfare. These are not distant futures, they are today's realities, reshaping the very nature of decision making. Power has left the battlefield and entered the algorithm. It no longer requires an army to win a war. It may only need access to the right code. The strategist of the past drew lines on maps. The strategist of tomorrow will draw boundary in cyberspace and neural networks. Where borders blur, sovereignty dissolves, and control depends on who commands data. Technology changes the rhythm of power. Decisions must now be made in seconds, yet their consequences can last decades. Automation has accelerated conflict. Information has weaponized opinion. And in the chaos of digital speed, statecraft risks losing the very element that defined its wisdom: time. Time to think, to foresee, to doubt. In this accelerated world, the greatest danger is not aggression, but automation, the surrender of human judgment to systems too complex to question. The future strategist must therefore be not only a commander, but a philosopher capable of understanding machines and morals alike. Beyond technology lies another, slower revolution: climate. No ideology, no border, no economy can escape it. As the planet warms and the resources strain, statecraft must evolve from the politics of conquest to the politics of survival. Rising seas will draw maps as surely as wars once did. Water and food will become strategic assets. Climate refugees will challenge borders, and energy transitions will reorder alliances. The geopolitics of this century may not be decided by generals or bankers, but by environmental scientists and engineers. In this emerging world, global cooperation will no longer be idealism. It will be necessity. The realist who ignores ecology will cease to be realistic at all. And beyond what technology and climate merges something unprecedented: the post human order. As machines learn to think and biology learns to design itself, the very definition of the human, the citizen, the leader, the soldier begins to shift. What happens to statecraft when decisions are made by synthetic intelligence? When loyalty can be programmed and national identity is augmented by code. In this post human horizon, power may become even more abstract, not confined to governments, but distributed among corporations, data empires, and digital communities. The state, once the ultimate container of power, now compete with entities that do not fly flags or hold territory. Cyberspace has become a new empire, invisible, borderless, and ruled by code. The strategist of the future must therefore master an impossible task: preserve the human element in a system that no longer depends on humanity. In the 21st century, the greatest challenge of statecraft will not be to gain power, but to remain in control of it. As technology amplifies every decision, ethics will lag and consequences will multiply. A single misjudged command could echo through energy grids, financial systems, or digital identities worldwide. And yet, amid the machines, the storms, and the data, the essence of statecraft endures. It is still about foresight, restraint, and deliberate use of power to shape a future worth surviving. The tools may evolve, but the craft remains constant. It is the same struggle: wisdom against impulse, order against chaos, civilization against decay. The future of statecraft will belong not to the coldest intellect, but to the most conscious one, able to see the invisible connections that bind technology, nature, and humanity into one fragile system. Perhaps the greater task of tomorrow's statesman will be to rediscover wisdom in the age of intelligence, to rebuild the moral compass amid noise and speed, and to remember that even as power turns digital, its purpose remains human. For in every age of transformation, the fate of nations and the destiny of civilization will depend not on the machine, but on the mind that commands it. From the dawn of civilization to the algorithmic hum of the modern world, statecraft has remained humanity's greatest experiment, an attempt to bring order, power, and meaning to survival. Empires have risen and fallen, yet the questions remain the same: who leads, why, and to what end? What is the purpose of power, conquest, peace, prosperity, or permanence? Across centuries, every ruler, every strategist, every dreamer of nations has faced this riddle, and though the instruments of statecraft have changed from swords to satellites, from treaties to data, its essence endures: the conscious shaping of destiny through reason, restraint, and vision. Power alone is not greatness. To dominate is easy, to sustain is difficult. True statecraft is measured not in victories, but in continuity, in the quiet strength that keeps a civilization intact through turbulence and time. The chronicles of history are filled with conquerors whose empires vanished like storms, but the legacy of those who mastered statecraft, leaders, thinkers, builders, endures like architecture of a long river. They understood what force wins moments, but intellect wins centuries. In the end, the state is not stone or soil. It is memory, principle, and imagination. It is the reflection of a people's will to exist and the craft that sustains it. The delicate balance between power and wisdom is what we call statecraft. Our age, too, stands at a turning point. Old systems erode, new powers rise, and the meaning of progress itself trembles. Yet the path forward, as ever, lies in understanding how power works, how interests collide, and how leadership must evolve when certainty fades. The purpose of this series of exploring statecraft is not to glorify power, but to illuminate responsibility, because every decision taken by a nation ripples through the destiny of the world. The art, therefore, is not just in acting, but in foreseeing, not in commanding, but in comprehending. Civilizations survive not by chance, but by discipline. The discipline to learn from the past, to adapt in the present, and to prepare for futures yet unseen. And so the legacy of statecraft is what timeless and unfinished. Each generation inherits it, reshapes it, and passes it forward, sometimes with wisdom, sometimes with sorrow, but always with the same unspoken hope that humanity might find order without oppression, progress without destruction, and power with balance. When historians look back on our time, they will not ask whether we were strong, but whether we were wise, because in the end, strength fades, wealth recedes, borders shift, but wisdom endures, and it is wisdom, calm, farsighted, and humble, that defines the true statesman from the mere wielder of power. Statecraft, then, is not the pursuit of domination, but the pursuit of understanding, the endless attempt to govern the world without losing our humanity within it.